Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the GepRC Phantom. And before I start, I just want to say to all of the companies and perhaps even individuals trying to do this ultralight toothpick brushless thing, this is how you do it. In fact, I don't think I could do a better job myself. And just like the GepRC Cine Pro 4K, it has about 3 things that needed to be changed. So let me tell you where they have got it right against the competition, starting off with the motors. They are GepRC's own 1103 8000 kV brushless motor, and this is where both the Happy Model Sailfly and the Eachine Red Devil failed by using 1102 motors. The shorter stator of an 1102 motor means that on a 2S LiPo there isn't enough torque to reach the RPMs needed to spin these 65mm blades, causing the performance to be really sluggish. So their fix was to use an oversized 3S LiPo, which then sent the RPMs too high and caused these flimsy props to bend, which in turn produces unwanted effects such as huge vibrations making the quads jittery to fly in the air. But also in the case of the Eachine Red Devil, the higher voltage burnt up one of the 1102 motors, which makes sense when you calculate the RPM of a 3S voltage applied to 8700 kV. And on the Sailfly, 3S caused the props to fly off in the air, even though they are almost impossible to remove by hand. So as someone who started this channel tinkering with micros, I wasn't happy with what they were doing with the Sailfly and the Red Devil, and to some extent the full speed Toothpick. But GepRC's 1103 8000 kV motors have enough torque with the taller stator to provide enough RPMs on a 2S LiPo, which is the sweet spot for the tolerance of these propellers. The frame is very minimalistic, consisting of a 2mm thick carbon unibody bottom plate, but unlike its competitors, there is hardly any flex in the arms. And also unlike its competitors, it's using standoffs and a carbon fiber top plate rather than TPU, but more on that later. The package comes with 2 lightweight GepRC Velcro straps and also a silicone mat to stop your LiPo from throwing. Usually I wouldn't use these kind of straps on any other model, but seeing as we are trying to be light here, the Velcro straps are necessary, and there are actually 2 cutouts in the top plate for the straps to seat properly. Without a LiPo, the model weighs 55 grams, which is heavier than the Sailfly and the Red Devil. It's not much heavier than the full-speed Toothpick though, which also got the motor choice right with an 1103 8000 kV motor. Therefore, with this extra torque, we can use a smaller 300 milliamp 2S LiPo. I'm using this GMB one, and its all-up weight with the battery is 75 grams. I think the Red Devil came to about 63 grams all-up weight, which does sound good until you realize the LiPo doubled the weight of the model, which is not the case with the GepRC Phantom. You also have to remember that the Sailfly, Red Devil and the full speed Toothpick are all mounting their batteries underneath, and the GepRC Phantom is a top mount, which usually requires a load of weight to be added. So when I move on to the next thing that GepRC have got right, its all-up weight is quite impressive, because both the Sailfly and Red Devil used the all-in-one Crazy Bee boards, which were originally designed to run PH2 connectors and a max current draw of 5 amps per ESC. Now don't get me wrong, the Crazy Bee boards are impressive, but they aren't really any good for anything bigger than a tiny whoop, and even then people started pushing the boundaries, adding XT30 connectors for better current flow, and doing this caused a current surge which often blew the built-in 5-volt regulator, and if it wasn't that failing, then it would be the ESCs going up in smoke. They tried to patch this up by using a capacitor, but it still pushed the limits of the all-in-one board, which is a problem because if one thing fails with an all-in-one board, then everything fails. So GepRC have been smart and used their 16x16 stable F411 stack, which has much greater tolerances. The ESCs are a 4-in-1 BL Halley S capable of running D-Shot 600. They are rated to 12 amps per ESC, which is actually overkill for this system, but it's much better than underkill. They can also accept a 2 to 4S voltage, so with me just using a 2S LiPo here, I can't see there being any problems like with magic smoke or overdriving the system. But despite this, they have added a 25 volt 300 microfarad low ESR capacitor, so I suppose you could experiment with different props or maybe tri-blades and a higher voltage LiPo with less worry. But for me, this guy is all about being lightweight, so I'll be keeping the stock props which just tension fit, and just like the Sailfly and the Red Devil, they are really difficult to remove, so you would need some kind of tool to do that, which sadly you actually don't get in the package with this one. But there are screw holes in the motors if you want to experiment with different props that require a screw to go in and don't tension fit. Then coming out of the side, attached nicely by a cable tie, is an XT30 connector, which stays nicely out of the way of the props, despite it looking like it gets pretty close to them. Then above the ESCs we have the F4 flight controller running Betaflight version 3.57. And it was set up probably as perfect as I've ever seen. GepRC have really stepped their game up with the Betaflight setup, giving Emax a run for their money. I did have to change the channel map. It was set up as AETR, but some FrSky transmitters do come set up like that, so I can't really complain. I reduced the LiPo warning voltage a little, but the ports and the config tab, the PIDs and the rates were all how I'd have them, so I didn't have to change anything. The RSSI was set to disabled, and I thought to myself, man, it would have been perfect if they had gone the extra mile and set up the RSSI, because this is the bind and fly version which comes with an XM Plus, but guess what? They have flashed the RSSI firmware to the auxiliary 12. It's the international FCC version of the firmware, by the way, so that's important to mention. It's only disabled in Betaflight because they offer the model as a plug and fly, so once again, bravo GepRC. Even Emax didn't do that with their Buzz model. So all I had to do was set the RSSI to the AUX 12 and then add it to the on-screen display. I think I also added the core temperature to the on-screen display as well, just in case there were any issues with the temperature. But sticking to the subject of the XM Plus, this is another genius move by GepRC because the Crazy Bee boards have a built-in SPI receiver, which are good, but only for about 100 meters at most, whereas this model has a full range receiver with an easily accessible bind button and a 3D printed mount with straws for the antennas to feed through. This brings me nicely onto the VTX, which has pit mode and switches from 25 milliwatt up to 200 milliwatt. So unlike the Eachine Red Devil, we can actually take advantage of that extra power of the VTX due to the full range receiver. It uses the tramp protocol and its antenna connects via a micro UFL connector, and I would usually complain about this method, but not when trying to get the weight down. One thing I did have to do is use a cable tie and some heat shrink on the linear antenna because it's too loose out of the box and would get caught in the props. So that's actually the only modification that I had to do. And the antenna is really long and towers over the LiPo, so the reception should be as perfect as it can be. Then lastly, we have the camera, which is the Cadex EOS 2 4x3 edition. Now, it's not my favorite camera, but it is necessary to get the weight down. And again, GepRC have got it right by mounting it into carbon fiber side plates rather than the Jallo TPU solutions. So on paper, it looks perfect, but before I fly it, let's see what else you get in the box. So we have the usual GepRC stickers as well as the manual for the XM Plus. There is a channel chart for the VTX, but just like the GepRC Cine Pro 4K, it advises since Betaflight version 3.30, the button on the VTX won't work if the tramp protocol is enabled in the ports. So it's just best to change the channel and the power of the VTX through the on-screen display. And lastly, we have a bag of spares giving you one set of extra props as well as a mini Allen key, some foam landing strips as well as a spare straw for the receiver's antenna. You are also given these rubber ends for the straws, but they just fall off in the air, so I wouldn't bother using them. Okay, let's go for a line of sight with this guy. It is borderline blowing a gale, which isn't perfect for this kind of model, but those are the cards that I am dealt, well, most of this year. So I'm just in angle mode at the moment. It's very quiet, and let's go for a punch as the wind gets up. So this is a full punch on a 300 milliamp GMB 2S LiPo. Let's go. Wow, that is perfect. We don't have any zinging vibration noises coming from the props. That is the noise that you want to hear. This is how you make these lightweight models into acro. It's just so nimble. It's tiny. You can't even hear it over the wind. It's just built perfectly. It's got the right motors on it with the right KV, perfect for a 2S, nice and light, should get decent flight times. I think GepRC have absolutely cracked it again. They are on an absolute roll at the moment. Well, I can feel the rain coming down on me a little bit, which isn't ideal. But this thing seems to be flying ideal. So just stock PIDs, stock everything. Just had to change a couple of things. Absolutely fantastic. Even just the little details, you know, of having the RSSI on the receiver, on the aux channel. Just had to enable it. That's the only thing I had to do, and change the voltage warnings. But other than that, this is what a lightweight brushless model should be, or dare I say it, a toothpick model. Let's bring it in for a landing and do some FPV with it. Okay, let's take a look at some DVR footage, and I actually had to fly on a different day because it just started raining. In fact, later on this day it was raining like crazy. So I'm just gonna dive this tree here and just pay attention to the voltage, 7.7 volts. There is minimal voltage sag, and that's when you know you have got a good setup. And it's a little bit windy here, but you couldn't really tell. I think I just did one inverted drop and I got a bit of buffeting, but yeah, this thing flies absolutely amazing. As you can see, I can do my inverted yaw spins here. We're not getting any jello whatsoever, and we've got bright sunshine here. And I actually paused for a second there because I was sitting down and I wanted to stand up to show you the range. Now look at the RSSI at the top. We're about 200 meters there and at 99% RSSI, and we don't have any breakup on the picture. This is where they have absolutely nailed it with this model. You could not do that with any of the other Toothpick models. The full speed model has got a 500 milliwatt VTX, but then it's only got like 80 meters of range on the D8 receiver, and then all of the SPI receivers on the Crazy Bee boards are only good for about 80 to 100 meters. So just having some fun with the trees there. Now you will see some sort of rainbow wavy lines. That's actually the rapid fire that's doing that. I found that with rapid fire and other VTXs, it's the way that it smushes the two antennas together, but getting nice and low under the trees. You can see with the Cadex EOS you do get the chromatic aberrations there, some artifacts, but you know, that's just something that you have to put up with. So I think this is where I do an inverted drop, and just at the bottom you can see just a little bit of buffeting. That is the wind. This thing is flying perfectly. There are some other great things about this as well. So very nimble, you can see around the trees there, no hesitation whatsoever, but also the current meter is very accurate. So if you watch me do a punch, I think it only read up to around about 12 amps. So like I say, let's see there, yeah, we got 10 amps there, but I think I did read 12 amps there, 13 amps there. So yeah, these ESCs, well, overkill for this model, but as I say, I would prefer overkill. Now, one thing that does catch you out is the LiPo, and that's a good thing really, but what you will see at 6.7 volts, you'd think, oh, we've got plenty of time, but look at the actual flight time. We're coming up to 3.5 minutes, and look, it's flashing, and we need to come in for a landing. But there you go. For me, this is the perfect Toothpick, and I thoroughly recommend it. So I'll link it in the description in the below if you wish to get one. And look at that. The current meter reading exactly 300 milliamps. Perfect. Oh, and if you can afford to do so, I'll link to my Patreon in the below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.